My name's Jesse J. Anderson. I write a lot about ADHD online. I'm writing a book on it, and I also kind of talk about it in. I have a newsletter and with videos, and I just like to write lots of funny little things about it. So I've been diagnosed for about 5 or 6 years now, and it's been a couple years since I started becoming more of a an online advocate, telling people about how ADHD works for me and helping educate a lot of people that are just learning maybe for the first time that hey, maybe they have this thing called ADHD and it's a lot different than they probably thought it was, like I did. And yeah, so I do have a full time job as a software developer, which is where I do that and then a million other things because I have ADHD and I like doing lots and lots of projects.
What's so fun about this conversation is that I followed Jesse J. Anderson on Twitter prior to even thinking about telling 31 stories in the month of October. And some of your tweets, it's like a little too close to home, but in a very humorous way. And so when you signed up for this interview, I was just like beside myself because your humor and your honesty online is so easy for me to connect with. It's like literally I was like I think one of the tweets I was like, "Stop reading my diary to the public, like this is super uncomfortable." But you have this way of just kind of like opening the curtain, and so I just 1, thank you for that because I laugh all the time. But 2, thank you for coming on and sharing your journey with us.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I get a lot of people that reply and say, I feel both seen and attacked by random things that I tweet about. And so, yeah, I've really kind of found, I don't know, I guess I found my sweet spot there where kind of, just being really authentic about my own journey and my own struggles and trying to, often present it in a humorous way to kind of laugh at myself, but also just help other people feel not so weird. Because I grew up feeling super weird and super different, and like no one really understood how I worked, or why I did things the way I did, and I didn't even understand it. And so, yeah, I find that just being really open and vulnerable about that, but with kind of a more humorous slant, I find that it really helps a lot more people feel accepted as they are, and that hey, it's okay to be weird. We're all kind of a little bit weird, and it's nice to know that we're not alone. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more, and I think there's something very lovely about having control over what you put out there. But I wanna start with your own ADHD diagnosis story. You mentioned you've been diagnosed for about 5 years. So, what was
Mhm.
that process like for you? What were some of the initial things that were going on that made you kind of start to question or, seek answers? Just, like, take me back to kind of those early days.
Yeah, so I had been married for about close to 10 years at the time, and I was basically oblivious to most of our problems. I thought everything was great. Things, weren't exactly great. When you have somebody, undiagnosed ADHD, there's, problems that can crop up after a while. But anyway, so we'd been married about 10 years, and then she had a conversation with a friend of hers who is actually my best friend's wife. So my best friend had been diagnosed with ADHD. I didn't even know about it. And then his wife and my wife were kind of talking about it. And my wife was suddenly like, wait a second. These symptoms, like all what this is, sounds a lot like Jesse. And so I think she tactfully kind of told me about it, but knowing that I think she knew if she said, "Hey, I think you have ADHD. You need to get diagnosed." I probably would have rebelled against that idea. So she kind of tactfully told me a couple of things that she heard from her friend, and that got me curious enough that I started looking into it myself. And then I also, after that, I met with my buddy and sort of asked him some questions too. Because I was like, "Oh man, a lot of these are starting to sound familiar." Some of the most obvious ones. Well, he told me about hyperfocus, because prior to being diagnosed, I used to think like, well, I can't have. I think I even said this to my wife. I can't have ADHD because I have no problem focusing on the things I'm interested in. which when you know ADHD is pretty hilarious
Yep.
because that's like almost defines what ADHD is in a way. So yes, that was sort of like the first like, oh, well, maybe that could be a thing because I'll spend hours and hours and hours on something that I'm really interested in. And then there's a few other things. Being late, I've always been late to everything ever. That's always been a struggle for me. And finding out about like the sleep issues that are often associated with ADHD, like delayed sleep phase syndrome, which I've always had. I can't go to bed until like 2 or 3 in the morning, which is a problem when you have to wake up at like 7 for a job. And then I remember in particular, I was reading just, I don't know, going through random websites and seeing lists of symptoms. And someone pointed out that it's common for there to be like sensory issues. And they specifically said t shirt tags. And that was like this light bulb moment for me because that's something I never really talked with anybody about. But I've always like t-shirt tags drive me just nuts. So I always rip them out of t-shirts because that the sensory just itch of a t-shirt tag really, yeah, just drives me wild. So it was pretty quick that all that kind of happened within the span of a couple of weeks. And I remember reading things that would say, like, don't try to diagnose yourself online, see a professional. So I, of course, ignored all that advice and did all the online tests and everything that I possibly could. And they all seemed to pretty strongly indicate, like, yeah, this looks like it really explains a lot of things. So my actual diagnosis process, I looked around a little bit. I found several people that only wanted to help if you're a kid. So there's a lot of people that were like, "Yeah, we'd love to help diagnose your kid, but we don't really want to see you." But I found one person in. I just looked at my insurance like specialist directory, and I found someone that said they specialized in adult ADHD. So I went and saw her and had a notebook full of all my symptoms, that things I'd started writing down that I thought like, oh, these are, all the problems I've had my whole life, and now maybe I have an answer. And so she listened to those and we talked about some of them. And then I think like the second week when I went to see her again, that's when she said like, yeah, you pretty clearly have ADHD. I didn't actually go through any sort of formal test at the time. She was just heard my story, talked through things, and then said, yeah, you have it. And then as far as medication, I guess that's when I was technically diagnosed, and that was like probably 9 months later. So at the time, I was like, I don't want any meds. I just want to understand what's going on with my brain. And then eventually said, let's try this out. And she referred me to a psychiatrist who mostly only saw kids, but she was willing to see me. And I think because I'd been seeing like a therapist talking about for like 8 months, she pretty quickly diagnosed me without me having to go through much of a formal process. So I know I'm lucky in that regard because a lot of people have to go through a lot of difficulty to get that diagnosis. Yeah, so that's sort of how diagnosis happened. Unfortunately, I'm not taking any meds now because I tried several. We did a kind of a plan. I've probably tried like 8 different medications, and none of them ended up landing for me. So I basically self medicate with coffee now. Yeah, and that's my story of how I got diagnosed.
I wanna touch on one thing. When you made that call to your buddy and you were like, "Hey, I wanna ask you some things." Like, did you preface it? Was it like, "Hey, can we go get coffee? I wanna ask you some things," or it was just like, "Let's go hang out and then I'm gonna pounce." Because, and the only reason I ask is I'm gonna go off of
Mhm.
the stereotype that men are kind of notorious for not wanting to talk about feelings, and I think I was kind of using this analogy. It's like the old outdated Disney analogy. Like you think with your brain and you feel with your heart. And so men, like there's no feelings, it's just like so, again, cliche. But when you
Right.
said that you got together with your buddy and you were asking him questions, I just like that immediately to me shows like this willingness and this like, it's almost like this drive to get some answers.
Yeah, so for us, I don't remember how I asked him. I think we just like met up for lunch, like, hey, you want to go grab a bite or whatever. And we've actually been best friends since like 6th grade. So we've known each other for a long, long time. And part of that, like looking back, it makes it a lot more obvious, like, oh, we both had ADHD. So that's why we like connected. And I remember in a little bit of a tangent, but I remember like in school, we were the first day of school, we were sitting right next to each other and we talked to each other the whole time. Like instantly, we were buds and talked a lot. And so then our teacher, like a couple weeks in, she rearranged seating and she had us on opposite sides of the class. and we still just talked to each other the whole time. So after that, she gave up, and she just anytime she updated the seating chart, she just made sure we were together and kind of off in the corner somewhere, because she figured out like there's no stopping them. They're just gonna talk across the whole class to each other if that's the case. So yeah, so we have a pretty good friendship and really understand each other, and so it was pretty easy for me to just be like, all right, bro, what is this? Like this, I'm reading all this stuff and it sounds like all the weird things that we've done our whole lives. Tell me more about it. Like, what was your process like getting diagnosed and stuff like that? And so I was lucky to kind of have that relationship already. So it was pretty easy to have someone to just like, pepper with all the questions. Like, tell me what is going on here. Cause it sounds weird and it sounds nothing like what I thought ADHD was growing up. So, yeah.
And it is. It's so complicated and complex, and some of the things you start to learn about, you can't quite comprehend how it actually happens. I mean, for me, you mentioned some of the ones that you first started reading about that you were like, "Wait, what?" Like, I had never heard the term rumination until the week I was diagnosed, and then it was this,
Mhm.
like, I mean, I'll go back to my Disney thing. It was like the big golden key getting put into the chest and it opens up and like there's like lights coming off and it's like the aha moment. I was just like, "Wait,
Mhm.
you mean other people aren't thinking about things that happened in first grade as a 35-year-old?" And you're just like, it's
Mm.
kind of unreal. When you look back at your journey, you get this diagnosis, it's kind of influence from people around you who are seeing what's going on. And for a lot of people, that's it. When you look back, what are some of the areas or what are some of the things that stand out that were a little bit trickier for you? Or you can now see as like, there was my ADHD. That was there it was. I just didn't know.
Yeah, in school, I basically at some point I just stopped doing any homework. I, I just knew. Eventually, I figured out. I was like, no amount of effort that I put into this really gets a satisfactory result. I'll just try for hours and hours, and basically, practically be like crying, trying to get myself to solve a problem, and just couldn't get myself to do it. And my parents would get frustrated, and it was a whole big thing. And eventually I was just like, I'm just gonna not do it. I'm gonna do and lucky for me, I always aced my tests because I was learning everything and I just couldn't do the homework. And so I had some teachers that saw that, and they would basically kind of adjust their grading plan to account for me, which I'm super thankful for. And some wouldn't, and then I'd like usually scrape by with D's in those classes. But yeah, that was, I think, a really big thing. Pretty early on just figured out, like, I didn't know why, but I knew my brain just cannot do this, like, busy, what felt like busy work to me. Like, this isn't doing this work isn't helping me learn stuff. It's just helping me like hate the topics. So I quickly learned, like, don't stop forcing yourself to do it. I know that I'm learning stuff. The grades are what they are, and I'll just sort of deal with the ramifications with like having to tell my parents that, and when it came report card time or whatever. Yeah, so I think that was one of the big early things where it was like really obvious that ADHD was part of that. Another thing was just, I've probably had around 30 jobs in my life. I would just jump from job to job because I would try something and I would either get bored of it, or like emotional dysregulation would pop up, and like the boss would say something that I took the wrong way or just hit me wrong. And I was like, you know what? I don't even need this job. I'm out. And I would just like quit jobs on a whim. But because of that, I got really creative at, like, I was really good at selling myself for new jobs. And I was very creative with my resume of like, all right, which jobs should I put in here that I'm not lying but look the best. And so, just put the year, don't put any dates in there so that it looks like a little bit less ridiculous of a job history rather than putting like 20 jobs in 6 years or whatever. So yeah, I think those were some of the big things. And then, like I said before, just being late to everything. It didn't matter how important it was. Like, I was late to most job interviews, and yeah, and nothing I could do seemed to change that. It would be the thing where I'm like, all right, I've got 20 minutes to get there, and that means I have like 10 minutes before I have to leave. And then 5 minutes before I had to leave, I would think of like, oh, I have to do this real quick and this real quick. And I'd have like 20 minutes worth of tasks that I would try to do really fast before leaving. And of course, I just ended up being late to everything. And
In
yeah,
our
that was,
house, we call that the "you need 15 minutes? Okay, I'm gonna plan for 45." Which is I mean,
yes.
I'm sure you can very much relate. It's the second my computer's open and I'm working on something and I'm excited about it, I'm like, "No, I only need 10 minutes." And he's just my boyfriend's always like, "Mhm, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
I'll come back in an hour."
yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I
I notorious for that.
I would love to ask a little bit about the journey you went through with trying different medications, and like was there something that stood out with like what wasn't working? I know you mentioned some issues with sleep. That's a big one for me as
hmm
well. This night owl. I was always like, "Oh my gosh, I'm a night owl." And it's like, "Nah, I don't think so." Cuz now that like I am medicated and I have a somewhat decent routine, I wake up in the morning and I'm like, "It's kind of nice here. Like this is kind of nice."
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so my medication journey, like I don't remember the order of things I took, but I tried Adderall, Vyvanse, Ritalin, Concerta, Strattera, and I think a couple more. For me, most of them basically did nothing. We would kind of titrate up, and it never felt like it was benefiting me. So titrate, if for people don't know, is just like slowly increasing the dosage. So you start really low and then increase the amount that you take. And so I tried that, and it never seemed like I hit a point where I was feeling any sort of benefit without negative side effects. I took Adderall, and that one just, I only took it for like 2 or 3 days because it just made me super angry. I took it and I just felt I was mad at everything all the time. And so, like, a couple days into that, I said to my wife, I was like, I think I'm going to stop taking this one. It feels like it's not really working, that it's just giving me kind of high annoyance factor. She was like, "Yes, please stop taking it." So apparently that was like a couple of rough days in the household. Yeah, another one. Which one was it? Strattera. I took that one. That was kind of the only one I took that really seemed to make somewhat of a difference, and it was less obvious to me. But my wife said she could tell. It just seemed like I noticed things more, is what she said. It was like I was aware of things around me a little bit more. But unfortunately, that one had side effects that was just made my I was just really sick to my stomach with that one a lot, and I couldn't ever figure that out one. So I eventually stopped taking that one. Yeah, which is I want to go back and try again because I keep wanting to have that moment that I've heard so many people have where they feel like it's like putting on glasses and then now they can like see this whole new, reality or whatever it is. And I've never had that moment, and I'm hoping that I just haven't found that right mix of the right medication and the right dosage. So I hope that's out there for me.
I like the glasses analogy, which is a much, more mainstream analogy than the one that I use, which is that it felt like prior to being medicated, I had dryer sheets stuffed in my head. Like, I don't know where it came
Mm.
from, but as I was trying to explain the brain fog, and
yeah.
for me, it was a monstrous difference, and again, like, you don't know what you don't know, and so you're like,
Right.
"Oh, everyone feels this way." It's sometimes kinda crummy, but we're all just, like, here going along.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The glasses one I think really works for me. Have heard other people say it, but I had that exact experience with glasses. I was like 15 or 16, and I was hanging out like some family event, and my cousin had like her glasses she had put like on the windowsill, and I put them on, and then I was like, "What? What is happening right now?" Like I remember very distinctly looking out at like a tree that I was outside the window, and I was like, I can see all the leaves on the tree. This is amazing. I had no idea that it was a thing. You just sort of like what you're used to just is your reality, and you don't even think that there could be something to improve upon it. And so that was just like this mind-blowing moment for me of realizing like, oh, I could, like, there's things I can do to help me see a lot better than what my current reality is like experiencing. Yeah.
So when you look at your ADHD, do you consider it hyperactive, inattentive? combined? And the only reason I ask is because your personality to me is so, like, jovial. It's like you come across as, like, the class clown, the guy that everyone wants to hang out with, like, super fun and outgoing, and I loved that you mentioned, like, you took the Adderall and you're like, "I just was so angry," and, like, to notice that means, like, you're kind of a happy person, and so I look back at my experience growing up, and the class clowns were, like, kind of the kids that the teachers were watching, and so I was, like, interested to
Mhm.
know when you were really young in those years when, like, boys were getting pulled out of class, like, left and right because that's what they
Mhm.
were looking for. Was there no hyperactivity or, like, I just have so many questions.
Yeah, so I think I'm more combined type. So I definitely pull from kind of both sides of the presentations. And when I was a kid, I had sort of like the internal hyperactivity, but I don't think I was ever like running circles in the classroom and stuff like that. And I was also pretty introverted, pretty shy kid, like around my butt, like my best friend, where we connected with each other. We understood each other, and then I was a lot more kind of like I guess like I never felt like I was quite class clown, but definitely more like yeah, lots of humor, laughing, being loud, and things like that. I've always been kind of loud, but mixed with being shy and kind of introverted. So I think that's probably a big reason why I never got that diagnosis early on when they were looking for yeah boys that were being super hyperactive. I think I just wasn't hyperactive enough for that to really kind of yeah be enough of a problem. And I also wonder if partly because I was testing so well, like I almost that was part of it too. Is like well he's doing well on his tests, so he's not there's not that big of a problem that we feel like we need to do something. And that sometimes I get kind of frustrated looking back, like, man, would this have changed everything if I had been diagnosed back then? But also, it was like the 80s and 90s, and they didn't really know what to do with kids then anyway that were diagnosed. So I don't know if it really would have even made that much of a difference. Thankfully, that seems to be changing. But yeah.
I'm gonna steal that little nugget that they wouldn't have known what to do with me anyway because that's a big part of my, like, working through the grief and the sadness of it is, like,
Hmm.
what could have been? And, like, "Hey, rumination, you
Yeah.
can't go back. It's not nothing's gonna happen, it's not gonna fix anything." So, when you think of ADHD right now in your life, what is your biggest struggle? What is the one thing every day that you're like, "Okay, I gotta be on top of this because this is what is my hurdle."
Yeah, I think a big one is well, I like to when I feel myself slowing down, I like to add more projects to my plate. Sometimes I refer to it as juggling chainsaws. Like juggling three chainsaws is really exciting until you've done it for a while. Then it's like, well, you got to add another chainsaw or it's going to get boring. And so I feel like I'm constantly adding new chainsaws to juggle and new projects, new things to do, and it's good in that it does like that helps me kind of continue forward motion. And sometimes I'll get bored with one project and it's super counterintuitive to someone that's neurotypical, but so I've like had to tell my wife, I'm like I announced that hey, I'm going to start working on this new podcast, and she's like, but don't you have this other thing you're supposed to be doing? And it's like, yeah, but doing this new project will actually help me get to the old project, which I know doesn't make sense, but like that forward momentum, getting that energy, like building up my own energy will enable me to take on more stuff. But because of that, organization, oh, this is one thing I didn't mention before, but I've always had like super messy desks, and that was like a big problem growing up. Like organization was always difficult, and it remains difficult. And it's easier to lose stuff now because so much is digital, so it just gets lost in the email and stuff like that. And so I think that is one of my biggest struggles is I take on so many projects and I have so many yeah chainsaws in the air, and then I struggle to kind of track everything, and so things will slip through the cracks where I don't realize like oh I need to finish that video that I did most of the work on and I never published it. Like I need to do that part. And yeah, so the biggest struggles I think I run in with is I just have so much going on. and I really should hire like some sort of personal assistant or something, but I don't know how to get organized enough to know what to do if I had a personal assistant. And so, yeah, I think that's a lot of what I'm doing is just sort of thriving and surviving in chaos, and not knowing a better way to do it other than knowing that there should be a better way to do it, and I just don't know how to land what that is. So that's kind of my biggest struggle.
I feel very connected to the wanting to ask for help, but also realizing that asking for help and getting prepared to have them help you is a lot of work.
Mm.
I have hired people and they will ask me, like, let me do things for you. And I have visitors apparently. Um, it actually is very fitting. It is uh, Orange Cat Appreciation Day, but I'm going to put her down. I digress. But yes, going back to it is very hard to ask for help because in our heads we're like, it's more work to show somebody how to do this. I'm just going to do it
Hmm.
all. How are you balancing all the things you're doing on the side and kind of this role you've taken on as an advocate for ADHD and awareness and the humor that comes with it? How are you balancing that and work and life and the messy desk that I also very much relate to?
Yeah, I don't have a great answer because it's a little bit chaos. Because yeah, like I this becoming sort of an ADHD advocate sort of came out of nowhere. About 2 years ago, I just started writing online, sharing sort of my own story, and then people really started to connect with it, and then that sort of evolved from there. Where now I write like the tweets and stuff a lot, and I'm doing some stuff on YouTube, and I have my weekly newsletter, all these sort of things that are going, but I also have like a family. I've got, a wife and 3 kids and a lot going on there. And two of the 3 kids are diagnosed with ADHD, and the third one's probably just about to be. We just haven't actually taken the step yet. And so there's a lot going on there. And I have a full-time job. Like I'm not doing this advocacy stuff full time. It's like a lot of side projects going on while I still have a full-time job. And the way I'm managing it all is I have no idea. It's chaos. I'm just sort of like filling in the gaps, and part of it is I make sure that the projects I'm doing I enjoy doing, because I feel like time is so weird when you have ADHD that somehow I can just cram a lot of stuff in if I'm really enjoying a lot of it. So a lot of just I stay up late and I work on a lot of stuff in the evenings and on weekends and stuff like that. And yeah, it's chaos, but it works for me for the most part. Other than kind of what I said before, those details kind of falling through the cracks. I will say, I'm sort of in a weird position right now where the work I'm doing is there's like something there that I haven't figured out. Like, is this something I could do full time? Because I'm like writing the book and I've had some sponsors reach out because I've got a somewhat of an audience now. And so I'm sort of just starting very early, but just sort of starting to explore like, what could that look like? Is there a move that I could do to do something full time? But I also love my job. The company I work for is amazing. So I'm not itching to get out of there. I really enjoy the job that I have, and so I'm in sort of a weird place where I don't know where I'm going to be in like 2 years, because maybe this sort of train I'm on doing all this side project stuff will turn into a business of some sort, which would be amazing because then I'd have more time to kind of pour into it and have more resources. But who knows? It's all sort of up in the air right now for me.
And you put it out there. Yeah, you put it
Yeah.
out there, hopefully answers come. Can we talk
Hmm.
about the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I it's been about a year since I announced that I was writing a book. The book's called Refocus, and then I think the subtitle is going to be A Practical Guide to Adult ADHD, but I've toyed with changing that.
Okay, I'm like embarrassed that I didn't know that the name of your book is the name of the podcast, which is but I will say, uh, good on you for not putting your name in the title. I did not think that through when the book you wouldn't be, you would, do the audio version of it. There is something about having to say my own name over and over again in a podcast that was like, yeah, we should have thought this one through.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I've kind of struggled with that a little bit, just talking about naming. like I said, thinking about business sort of stuff. Like, should I have a brand? Because I kind of don't really right now. I just sort of have like my name and various associated things. But yeah, so Refocus is a name that I've started to use because I did a course last month and I called that Refocused Your ADHD Brain. And yeah, basically I'm kind of trying to with the course, which is based on what I've done so far in the book. And the book itself, it's really aimed to sort of be that the guide that you most people don't get when you get diagnosed. Because if I hadn't really sought out, tried to find more information, I wouldn't have known that much about ADHD. Like I wouldn't have learned about rejection sensitive dysphoria or time blindness or emotional dysregulation, like all these really kind of key foundational things that, like, if your doctor diagnoses you, they're not going to tell you about any of that. So which is astounding because it's so like important to understanding what it's like to live with ADHD. So my goal with the book is for it to be that sort of starter guide of like, hey, you just got diagnosed, or hey, you think you might have this. This is like your starter guide to kind of understand, almost like ADHD 101, like those basics of what does it mean to have ADHD? What does life look like with it? And then how can you sort of thrive now that you know where those differences lie in the way your brain works.
And where are you in the process of this?
Yeah, so it's very much like I'll be really excited about it for like 3 months and I'll write a ton of stuff, and then there was one point where I went 4 months and I didn't write at all, and then now I'm kind of back into it and it's juggling all the things. So where I'm at right now, I feel like it's probably like 80-90% done, and I don't know, the math doesn't work out, so I don't know what percent is actually left to work on it. But I feel like it's in a pretty good place right now, and partly why I just did the course was to sort of put a lot of that content into practice, see like what does this look like when I'm actually like putting it in, like doing like breakout rooms and sort of like applying some of this knowledge in with real people and sort of seeing how they interact with it and questions they had. And so I'm sort of getting back to the book and sort of reapplying like all the knowledge I've kind of learned from doing the course of, yeah, just like, oh, there's some holes here where I didn't cover this topic enough, and so I want to dive more into that and dive, or I learned of some new research that's going to change how I think about perspective memory or whatever it is. So yeah, I feel like, I mean, 6 months ago I had a hope that it would come out like the fall of this year, but now that's not going to happen. So I'm now sort of aiming loosely like early 2023. So early next year is the goal. So I'm kind of getting to the point now where I've hired I've hired like an editor and sort of like those last steps to sort of like get to the final like proofreading and all of that so that I can get things lined up. So yeah, it's writing a book is so much more work than I thought it would be. It's like you making 20,000 decisions and not knowing if you chose right for any of them, because like the book is still sort of, no one's really getting to look at it. I have done some beta reading, but yeah, there's a lot of like just trying to figure out how can I make this so that in 10 years it's still a valuable resource for people.
Well, and that's the thing that's so hard is obviously what we're talking about right now with ADHD isn't going anywhere, but you've mentioned like, "Oh, I found this really cool new research." Like it's coming out all the time. And I think it's
Yeah.
just going to continue to grow in like the subject for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder because so much has changed. And I also think there's like this renewed interest because of the pandemic.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think a lot of people ended up working from home or whatever it was, and then their routines went away, and then suddenly they realized, oh, there's a real problem here. And that kind of combined with the rise of, people on TikTok and stuff like that sharing their own journey. And so I think awareness is really kind of hitting an all-time high. And there's like some of that can be problematic because there's people on TikTok saying stuff that's not actually the case. But I think overall, I still view it as more positive than negative, because it's really helping break a lot of the myths that people have believed, for like myself, that I believed for like 30 years about ADHD. And so even though there is some misinformation out there, in general, I think it's really helping a lot more people become aware of it. And there's the whole like neurodiversity movement, which is really helping propel things forward as well. And yeah, because of that, I think, like you said, there's already a bunch of research kind of in progress, and I think there's going to be more just because there's more people aware of what ADHD is really like.
Yeah, there's always going to be people who are putting out stuff that is not necessarily accurate. Anyone can go on
Hmm.
the internet. There's great resources on the internet. There are lots of, ways to connect with people. I think for me, I have had such a positive experience interacting with the ADHD community online. And that to me is like so welcoming because I think for a lot of us, like middle school, high school, I mean, it's probably just been my entire life. Like relationships have been hard. And so then you have this entire group of people who understand you and want to see you thrive. And so I would love if we could just touch on that. You put yourself out there and people respond to it. And that is exciting. And it probably comes with some concerns. But what has your experience been like?
Yeah, I think the community aspect has been amazing. Sort of like what you said. I think so many of us grew up feeling isolated, feeling weird and different and not really knowing why, and feeling like it seems like everyone else got some instruction booklet or something and I missed it, and I feel like I don't know how to connect or whatever it is. I don't know how to fall in line or do what everyone else seems to do. Or another one is like what most people think of as common sense. Like, I don't know, I missed the day they taught us what common sense was because I don't seem to have it. I have my own unique sense of things, but it doesn't seem to line up all the time with common sense. Yeah, so I think the community aspect has been amazing and so supportive. It really feels like we all sort of have each other's back because we've all felt so isolated for so long. And now we're finally finding other people that understand us. And I think so. That's another thing. For so long, I just felt not only isolated, but misunderstood. Like, I feel like a lot of people with ADHD have really great intentions. And because of the ADHD, like our actions don't always line up with that. And so I think we're commonly misunderstood. And like people think we have bad intentions because our actions don't tell the full story. And finding other people that understand that and really get it, like that actually believe that that's true, because it just feels like even when I would explain that to people before, they didn't really, they're like, okay, yeah, but maybe you're actually just lazy or whatever. So yeah, the community's been amazing to just feel supported and understood and seen. Yeah.
And I think every conversation I have with someone, I hear them mention something that they know about that I haven't been exposed to yet. And I'm like, oh, I have to go look
Mm.
that up because, yeah, like that is
Yes.
something that okay. And because it is so in depth, I want to ask you, we've talked a lot about all the amazing things you have going on and all of the chainsaws that are in the air,
Yeah.
running chainsaws, right? Is that you have to
Yes,
make sure they're running
absolutely.
because
Yeah.
otherwise they're not as dangerous.
Uh-huh.
Where do you see yourself thriving?
Yeah. I think that I think I'm in a place where I'm trying a lot of things, and a lot of them are really, I'm really able to lean into my strengths. And they're almost like strengths I didn't even know that I had. Like you sort of mentioned before, very kindly, like my sort of jovial personality, or sort of like sharing humorous takes on things. And sort of, I feel like I have a strength in sort of getting to like, how can I communicate a big idea with a little amount of words? Like, how can I briefly like communicate a really big idea and sort of like help teach people and grab that feeling that is common, that's hard to describe. And so yeah, so a lot of the stuff I'm doing, I feel like has been strengths that I didn't really know I had. And whenever I'm able to lean into my strengths, I always feel like I'm thriving. Like that just feels like, oh, this is like, it's almost like finding purpose. Like this is what I was building towards. I had no idea. For example, I mentioned before that I'm a software developer. I've given talks at conferences about tech topics. So I've talked about like machine learning and things like that at conferences, and it almost feels like I was doing that in preparation to be able to help teach people about ADHD. And I had no idea why I did that before. And now it feels like, oh, that was almost just like training for this moment now, where I feel like I'm able to make a really big impact in people's lives and be part of like I know my own story, like getting diagnosed with ADHD made such a huge impact for me in understanding my whole life, and it feels amazing to be able to be part of that story for other people, to help other people have that moment of realizing, yeah, they're not lazy, crazy, spacey, stupid, selfish, or all those like negative labels we get. Like that isn't the reality. And so just doing the stuff I do and being able to be part of that story for other people is so fulfilling. And yeah, it just feels like I've kind of found this purpose, and I'm really, yeah, that's where I feel like I'm really thriving these days.
And I will just say, I do hope that you get your glasses moment with medication. But if you don't, like what you just said is also pretty awesome. Like the how easy it flows from you that like you want to help people. Like I think that that is something that is just like we need more of that in the world. This community needs more of that in this world,
Mhm.
like we both have said like you don't know until someone tells you, and there's so many people out there, and this outlet online, whether it's any one of these social media networks or podcasts or blogs, like that could be their only outlet.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
So to wrap up, I would like to ask, when we talk about ADHD and the things that you see out in public and kind of the public perception, what is kind of at the top of your list of what you would want people to know? Or what is like the narrative that you are working to change that people are just sticking to? And obviously, we know the outdated idea of this young boy who's hyperactive and bouncing off the walls. And like every day, every single person who stands up and is like, yeah, no, that's obviously not me. We're working towards that. But there's so many other things that come with it.
I think it's great, like I said, that the neurodiversity thing is starting to pick up, that we're really beginning to accept that people have different brains, and that that's actually a good thing. That's not just something to accept, but to embrace. Because I think people with ADHD really have so many strengths to add. They there's so much of like creativity and thinking outside the box, and really like when we get excited about something, we can just put so much energy and enthusiasm and just like fire into it, and we can really make like amazing things happen. I'm reminded in the course at some point somebody asked, they were talking about a career path they were considering, but they were worried that like because they had ADHD that career path was not possible for them. And I just sort of said like, you may need some help, like some coaching or something like that. But I think people with ADHD are amazing. I think we can do anything. We can do incredible things. Actually, there's a thing that Dr. William Dodson calls omnipotential, which is sort of like this idea that people with ADHD, when we embrace something, like when we get excited about something, anything is possible. Like any sort of direction that we can go down. If we can get like engaged and moving forward, like we can learn anything. Like I've never found a thing where I'm like, I want to do this, and then found like, oh, I can't. Like it's just like if I look at something, I instinctively or like innately feel like I can do that if I dive into it. Like if I want to learn to do this thing, I'm going to make that happen. It's anything is basically possible. And I think I think as people learn to sort of like embrace that, there there's a lot of strength that can happen from embracing the what people with ADHD can sort of add to an organization or business, or just like their own unique takes on the world and starting something new. Like so many, I don't know the stats offhand, but so many entrepreneurs are like overwhelmingly ADHD. Like the percentages are really high there. And part of that is because a lot of us learn that, hey, I don't really function well in like a normal 9 to 5 job. And so I'm going to follow my own path, and because of that, like really creative, unique things get discovered and created and built, and it really makes the world a more interesting place, I think, and a better place. So yeah, I love that neurodiversity is taking off as sort of this thing to embrace and be not be afraid of, and not be focused on. So much of the history also with ADHD is focused on the negatives, like how do you overcome the negatives, and there's so much positive to embrace, so much of that sort of strength based, uh yeah, those strengths that we really need to dive into. Yeah, I think I got a little bit
No,
rambly
I
there,
love
but
it.
that's sort of that's sort of where I see it going, and I'm excited for the future with ADHD, because I think once people know why their brain works a certain way, it almost like unlocks this, like, oh, well, now I understand why. And so now that I understand why, it sort of like frees me to do things differently. Like so much of productivity stuff, I got trapped trying to do stuff that didn't work for me, but I kept trying to force it to work because I was like, it's working for other people. Why won't it work for me? And once I learned about ADHD, it almost like freed me to realize like, hey, that doesn't work for me, and that's fine. My brain's different, and so I'm going to find what does work for me and really embrace that. And I feel, you asked earlier where I feel like I'm thriving, and I feel like in my life, the last 5 years is when I've been really thriving the most, because I felt like the shackles have been off and I can just sort of like embrace who I really am and how my brain actually works, and stop trying to force other things that are strategies that are supposed to work and don't for me. I can just say that those don't work for me, and I'm going to move on and do what does work for me and go forward with that.
I love that. I love the idea that, we're working to remind people with ADHD that we all live in a world that wasn't built for us, whether it's your
Mhm.
job or school or your house or where you live or your relationships. Like, we are always working against things. And when you kind of, you were like, oh, I'm trying to do this thing, everyone else is doing it. It just makes me think of like how many day planners I have purchased in my life that
Mhm.
maybe if I were ever lucky, got a month's use out of. But, it was never a
Mhm.
consistent month. It was never like the month of March is filled out. It was like 1 week here, 8 days there. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a planner right here that I bought. I was really dedicated. I was like, this is gonna be the one. And I bought it, and I just opened it up. It was expensive. It was like a $60 planner.
Whoa.
And yeah, it was I thought that was gonna convince me to use it, I think. I was really excited for it. I got it. Not a single day. I haven't filled out a single day in that planner. Just another thing to add on to the ADHD tax of something I thought would help. And it's like, nope. That's just $60 down the drain, and didn't get a single day's worth of use out of it.
Well, you'll have to repurpose it so that you don't go down the shame train of like, "Oh my gosh, I spent this
Right.
money." Like, how can you repurpose that $60 thing? Or you just need to tell somebody to get rid of it when you're not looking, and then, like, out of
Yeah.
sight, out of mind.
Right. Yes. That's probably the solution. I just need to like name a certain box, like dedicate a certain box, and I just toss stuff in there, and have my wife just like every week or so come by and just take everything in the box and just throw it away, because I can't bring myself to throw it away. But if it's just, yeah, just I don't want to know that it exists anymore. Just take it away.
Jesse, this was such a pleasure. I am so grateful for this time and for you sharing your story. And I'm so excited to see what comes and to read this book and to like dive into what you know and to increase my knowledge. And I'm really grateful. I had so much fun. My cheeks hurt from laughing. And thank you for putting that energy into the world. It truly is like a hilarious gift. If you're not following him, you have to, because it is like someone telling your deepest darkest secrets to the world, but in a way that's kind and funny and like self-deprecating. So,
Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, this was a blast. I had a great time. I'd love to do it anytime. So thank you so much.